Hello and welcome to Maximum Tupac, the first talking book about Tupac Shakur. It was written and researched by Darren Brooks, music is by Amanda Thompson and it's read by Sean Jones. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk.
Never thought I was necessarily the best rapper, the best nothing. I think I'm the realest nigga out there. I do think that. I think I own that. If I could patent being real, I think I own that. Because I think being real is just being true.
It was only supposed to be a night out at the boxing. On the 7th of September 1996, Mike Tyson was continuing his relentless rise back to the top of boxing's heavyweight charts with a high-profile bout versus Bruce Sheldon in Las Vegas. As had become commonplace at such glamorous events, the celebrity contingent was conspicuous by its presence in the opulent surroundings of the MGM Grand Hotel. Two such celebrities were Marion Suge Knight, charismatic boss of Death Row Records, and Tupac Shakur, the multi-talented rapper and actor who had become the centrepiece of Knight's influential hip-hop label. For centrepiece, though, also read mouthpiece. Previous years had witnessed an increasingly volatile war between the rapping fraternities of opposing American coasts, a conflict which had already delivered its share of shootings and urban as well as media battles. Roles of the involved personnel had long since been defined. Knight and Shakur represented the West, whilst the likes of Sean Puffy Combs, more popularly known as Puff Daddy, and Biggie Smalls were public ambassadors for the East. A previously verbal war had gradually degenerated into the physical, as conflicts were now being fought openly on the streets of America, as well as through the tried and tested media of newspapers, magazines and music. This particular September evening, though, witnessed tragic events that would ultimately send shockwaves throughout the music world and incite further violence as a hugely successful musician and symbol of the West Coast Brotherhood left the mortal world at the behest of a rogue gunman. Untimely death has long been acknowledged as a shot in the arm for the career of a musician. In addition, the presence of a somewhat nefarious reputation can also assist in providing an artist with a certain X factor, that indefinable ingredient which can promote a singer from also-ran to seductive star. Tupac Shakur possessed the latter in abundance and would ultimately join the former. That elite band of brothers whose lives had been criminally and cruelly cut short. He was only 25 years of age when he met his death in Las Vegas, his untapped talent yet to be fully explored, but such was his prolific nature he had already compiled a body of work so comprehensive that his career would shine brightly for years after his departure. Posthumous singles, albums and movies seemed never-ending in the months after his death. Such releases allowed established fans to mourn their hero through his work, whilst those previously unaware of Tupac Shakur were given wider opportunity to hear the music of an artist whose destiny had proved to be that of unwilling martyr for the lifestyle of gangster rap. His gift for music and performance was undeniable, but it was the endless controversy persistently snapping at his heels, which, while providing his public persona with a certain glamour, would eventually lead to his downfall. The gang war, having threatened to explode for some years, had been raised to such a level that it seemed only a matter of time until another life was taken. When the hostilities finally erupted, it was the life of one of the genre's most successful artists that was claimed. Tupac's life had seen its fair share of deprivation, of a regular father, a regular home, but never of love and, without doubt, never of talent. His mother named him after an Inca Indian chief, Tupac Amaru, meaning shining serpent, and Shakur, an Arabic word which, when translated into English, reads as thankful to God. With the support of such spiritual influence, Tupac wasted little time in shining his own unique light onto the world and into the lives of those fortunate enough to be part of his life. It seemed as though he was fully aware that his life was to be short, such was his capacity to fill his existence to the very brim. A candle was lit the very day he was born, and the shining serpent had a life to lead before it burned irrevocably away. Take a deep breath, world. Here comes Tupac Amaru Shakur.
All of our young black males are not violent. They're all not taking the law into their own hands. They're all not going to that extreme to accomplish some sort of achievement in their life. So this is just another way of showing how you can be a young black male and accomplish something.
Tupac Shakur was born Lassane Parish Crooks in Brooklyn, New York on the 16th of June 1971. The firstborn of Alice Faye Walker and William Garland, both passionate supporters of radical politics, his mother would change his conventional name to the more ethereal Tupac Amaru Shakur, whilst the future star-to-be was still a young child. She insisted on such a name for her child, wanting him to be aware he was a product of the world, of a wider culture, and not merely a commodity from a brutal Bronx neighbourhood. Just as the fortunes that the future held in store for him, Tupac was born amidst family controversy. His mother, more commonly known as Afeni Shakur, possessed a revolutionary nature and was a promoter of Afro-American rights. She eventually became a card-carrying member of the New York branch of the Black Panther Party, having become hooked on radical politics following her attendance at a Black Power conference in Philadelphia. In 1969, she was arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to bomb several public areas of New York City. She was released on bail and soon afterwards learned she was carrying her first child. In February of 1971, now heavily pregnant with Tupac, her bail was revoked and she was sentenced to spend time in the Women's House of Detention in Greenwich Village. In May, she was finally freed, having been acquitted on all charges against her, and just a month later, she brought Tupac into the world. Tupac was subjected to a nomadic childhood, the family spending much of his early years travelling back and forth between the Bronx and Harlem, often being reduced to living in shelters along the way. Such a lifestyle, however, would ensure the young Tupac felt somewhat detached from his contemporaries and the world, a consequence of the lack of opportunity available to him to put down roots. There was the nagging feeling he came from somewhere yet nowhere, compounded of course by the lack of a regular father figure. He had been told at a young age that his natural father was dead, but he was to discover otherwise in later years. This absence of a stable family life would merely compound his feeling of social and domestic detachment. As a consequence of his mother's choice of lifestyle, Tupac found himself in an ever-changing family unit, with a series of his mother's male companions and several other additions to the family, brought about by these liaisons, including two half-siblings, a brother and a sister, as well as his first accepted stepfather, Mutula Shakur. However, he would soon lose Mutula to prison following his involvement in a fatal armed robbery. Indeed, a second recognised stepfather, Geronimo Pratt, followed the same unfortunate path. Eventually, a character from the Bronx known as Legs joined the family in Harlem after he and Afeni became lovers. A young Tupac, desperately craving the security of a secure home, laid claim to Legs as the latest paternal presence in his life. It was when he reached the age of 12 that an early talent for show business manifested. Encouraged by his mother to enroll in a Harlem theatre group, namely the 127th Street Ensemble, Tupac dazzled audiences in his early stage performances, easily adapting to the art of theatre and music. Even at this embryonic stage, a career in the arts for Tupac Shakur seemed assured. The family moved yet again, however, in 1986 to Baltimore, where Tupac sought to further his studies in performing arts by enlisting at the prestigious Baltimore School of Arts. Having been accepted to study ballet and acting, it became increasingly apparent that music was to play a prominent role in his life, and fate conspired to ensure music and history collided in Baltimore, as Tupac, under the adopted name of MC New York, wrote and performed his first rap. With that initial composition under his belt, his time at Baltimore proved extremely worthwhile and provided the adolescent Tupac with an established career goal. Indeed, his personality and raw talent left a lasting impression on those who taught him. In turn, it was they who were helping to shape his skills and assist in facilitating his obvious potential. It was his family's departure from Baltimore, though, that witnessed the turning of the tide. After just 2 short, relatively settled years for Tupac, his mother decided to uproot once more and thus subject her children's lives to further upheaval. Their destination on this occasion was California, and the family set up home in Marin City. Whilst already accustomed to such a desultory manner of living, this particular relocation had a much more profound effect upon an impressionable Tupac, to the extent that the early promise he had developed as a performer now came under genuine threat. True talent, however, is impossible to hide, and although life in Marin City saw him fall seriously by the wayside, it became an experience that would colour his attitude as an artist. For Tupac Shakur, real life was only just beginning.
You know how hard it is. You know how you felt when you didn't have no money and no record deal. Why are you gonna try to destroy another nigga career? Don't do that. Represent by example. I'm not saying my lifestyle is the best. I'm saying this is the lifestyle most lived by the most motherfuckers out there.
Whilst the Shakurs landed in the city of Marin, Tupac would soon find himself immersed in hot water. The travelling lifestyle to which he had been continually exposed was now beginning to have an adverse effect on the prodigious youngster, and within months of settling in the city, he made the decision to leave the family home and fell into the unforgiving arms of homelessness. A downward spiral was at this point set in motion, eventually culminating in him taking up residence with a nearby drug dealer. Tupac himself became reliant upon drug dealing to supply an income. Subsequent interviews with Tupac about this period in his life see him freely admitting that his departure from Baltimore, and more specifically leaving behind his vocational education at the School of Arts, was the crucial component in his diversion from the straight and narrow. He was forced to absorb another body blow when he discovered his stepfather, Mutulu Shakur, had been convicted for his part in a 1981 armed robbery and, as a result, jailed for a total of 60 years. Tupac, however, showing the kind of resilience that would characterise his developing career as a rapper, rose above such misfortune. His rapping skills were continuing to flourish, and he had begun to compile a catalogue of rap lyrics. Indeed, he even managed to secure the services of his first manager, one Layla Steinberg. It was at this time he assembled his first band, entitled Strictly Dope, with several of his peers, and the band went on to record an unreleased album with TNT Records. It was Tupac as an individual, though, whose talent was transporting him to high places. His abilities as a dancer, cultivated in Baltimore, were also about to be recognised thanks to Steinberg and her introduction of him to Shock G, member of the band Digital Underground. Based in Berkeley, this rap collective ultimately achieved Grammy nominations, but they were unaware that in the process they were also contributing yet further to the history of rap music by giving a young Tupac Shakur his first big break. In 1989, at the tender age of 18, he was invited by Shock G to join the band on tour, ostensibly as a roadie and dancer. But, as it transpired, there would be so much more to be gained from his association with the band. His vast gifts as a rapper were duly noted, and Shock G, suitably impressed, granted him the opportunity to appear alongside the band on their next recording. Tupac was about to make the leap from raw talented rookie to that of professional rapper, and it was a move he would make with awesome ease. If anything was to hold him back, it would be his tough guy reputation, which was proliferating at a relentless rate, and he was rapidly becoming a focus of the law wherever he travelled. In fact, he had been arrested on no less than 8 occasions before he left his teenage years behind. His artistic reputation then was growing in almost identical proportion to that of his felonious record. Surely, though, the latter couldn't affect the former, or could it?
I'm just saying, be honest. You doing something I can't do, and I'm doing something you can't do. I respect you, respect me. You know there's no nigga out here like this. I don't have no insecurity about that, and no delusions. I'm the future of Black America.
Digital Underground, having employed the burgeoning Tupac as a dancer, now had another rapper on board who was clearly focused upon making the leap to fully fledged recording artist. He began by adding his rap skills to the track Same Song, which appeared on the plainly entitled This Is an EP release, as well as featuring on the long player Sons of the P. His talent finally committed to disc and with a guaranteed audience would see him made an irresistible offer. Just months after his recording debut with Digital Underground, the Interscope record label dropped into his lap a recording contract all of his own. He grabbed the chance with both hands and situated himself at once in the nearest recording studios to begin work on his debut release. When the final product emerged in November 1991, it caught the US music press unawares, being as it was a much looser sounding work than the product of Digital Underground, as well as containing that vital ingredient, a huge portion of attitude. The 13-track album, released under the title Tupacalypse Now, contained many a rapper's delight. It provided his breakthrough hit Brenda's Got a Baby, an aching track in which the story of a teenage pregnancy is movingly told, and which betrayed a great deal of sensitivity in a music genre more popularly noted for its bombast. As well as spawning a further hit single in Trapped, the album sold comfortably enough to bring a smile to the lips of his new paymasters. Smiles were not the order of the day elsewhere, however, as Tupac and specifically his debut record was soon called into question in the courtrooms of America and, incredibly, in Congress. The album embraced the myriad strands of the gangster rap machismo and, with its references to such unsavoury subjects as cop killing, had already found itself exposed to intense debate in the gossip columns and letters pages of the US media. However, it was Vice President Dan Quayle, already at loggerheads with the entertainment industry in his continuing battle to promote traditional family values, who would describe the record as having no place in our society. From that point onwards, Interscope knew that they held in their hands something very special. Tupac's debut album mutated into a fearless fly in the face of authority, and that alone was newsworthy in the eyes of young music buyers, and, thanks to such unexpected publicity, the album continued to do brisk business. As if such high-reaching controversy was not enough, there was more to come as the record found itself at the heart of a murder trial. An American lawyer defending a 19-year-old man accused of killing a Texas trooper claimed that Tupacalypse Now, an album the defendant owned, incited him to kill. Tupac, though, failed to crumble under the weight of such intense scrutiny, perhaps partly because there was continuing legal activity in his own private life. Back in California, he was arrested for jaywalking and subsequently filed a $10 million lawsuit against Oakland police for alleged police brutality. Although the case was taken a little further, the incident served to underline that Tupac was not only gaining notoriety as a result of his newly established commercial viability, but he was also developing an unwelcome reputation for aggressive nonconformity. Crucially at this point, America's rap scene was being divided into opposing factions, East Coast versus West Coast, and such attitude was a prerequisite for membership of either gang. Tupac incidentally falling on the west side of the fence. His career, however, remained defiantly unaffected by the activities that swirled incessantly around him. Indeed, his star quality would combine with his teenage training to supply him with a further career option. He was about to be offered the chance to make the crossover from recording artist to movie star. The music industry might continue to provide his regular main meal, but the silver screen was to prove a very tasty dessert. His debut album was consolidating in the face of voluble congressional concern. His celebrity status had increased tenfold, and he was about to see his name on cinema screens throughout the land. Without any shadow of a doubt, Tupac Shakur had arrived.
I'm out here in the streets, you know what I mean? Whooping niggas' ass, starting wars and shit, putting it down, dropping albums, doing my shit.
As the gang warfare of the rap scene continued to fragment into antagonistic indiscipline, movies would prove to be a welcome diversion for Tupac Shakur. Having already appeared briefly in the movie Nothing But Trouble, starring Chevy Chase and Danny DeVito, it was to be 1992, less than a year after the release of his debut album, that would see him make his first headlining role on the big screen. The script he was offered was that of the domestic drama Juice, directed by Ernest R. Dickerson. Tupac's high profile secured him the lead role of Bishop, in a tale of 4 young African-American teenagers whose lives changed dramatically after their decision to commit a robbery. Although the movie was only a modest success in cinemas, Tupac was praised for a performance that would lead to a proliferation of offers for further movie work. Although he was forced to turn down some roles due to music commitments, he accepted the opportunity to star alongside Janet Jackson in his next project. He took the male lead in Poetic Justice, a modern-day road movie directed by John Singleton. The story focuses upon a young woman who reluctantly agrees to go on the road with her best friend and her mailman, Lucky, played by Tupac, following the murder of her boyfriend. Filming of the movie provided a series of tense moments, one of which being Jackson's insistence that Tupac undergo an HIV test before she would film any love scenes between them. Such tensions were apparent in the final product, and their on-screen chemistry, whilst not overtly affecting the movie as a whole, was somewhat distant. His relationship with the film's director also suffered, as his continuing inability to steer clear of trouble forced John Singleton to drop him from his next film, Higher Learning, later that year. With a twist of irony, Singleton eventually cast Ice Cube, a rapper who had been a great influence on Tupac's music career. The unabated aggression in Tupac's life emanated almost entirely from the East Coast-West Coast gang wars, which continued to escalate at a relentless pace. But his own pugnacious nature would see him too often in the company of police officers. Just months after Juice opened in cinemas, Tupac was involved in a fight with a number of former associates from his days in Marin City. This was no ordinary brawl though, and resulted in tragedy as a 6-year-old bystander was shot in the head. Tupac's half-brother, Maurice Harding, also a member of the band Thug Life, was arrested in connection with the incident but was ultimately released due to lack of evidence. There were a string of such unpleasant incidents just prior to the release of his second film that further reinforced the gangster image that Tupac had embraced. In March 1993, whilst in Hollywood, a limo driver accused Tupac of using drugs whilst in his vehicle, and he found himself under arrest following a physical altercation between the pair. Charges against him, however, were subsequently dropped. He was arrested yet again just a month later on a charge that would on this occasion escort him to prison. Whilst attending a concert in Michigan, Tupac attacked a fellow rapper with a baseball bat, his violent conduct landing him behind bars for 10 days. Despite his seemingly endless brushes with the law, Tupac was not yet ready to relinquish the aggressive lifestyle he had adopted, and rather than spending the time inside to cool off, he was back in jail before the end of the year. At Halloween, he was arrested on suspicion of an alleged shooting of 2 off-duty Atlanta police officers, whom Tupac insisted were subjecting a black motorist to unnecessary harassment. The incident was never fully investigated, and once again no charges were brought. In November of the same year, though, he became reacquainted with the jail cell following the accusation by a female fan that he sexually abused her following an evening with friends in a New York nightclub. Tupac vehemently denied the charges but was expected to spend time inside under intense legal scrutiny whilst the crime was investigated. During this time, several West Coast rappers, including Warren G, Coolio and Ice-T, showed their support for Tupac by filming the video for Temptations, a single from Tupac's next album. Such support from his musical comrades was well received at a somewhat difficult time for Shakur. Although films and felonies have been laying big claims on Tupac's life and career, there would always be time for music. In the midst of the seemingly endless controversy, he was able to record and release his second album. It was relieving to find Tupac's name linked with business rather than brawn once more, and Strictly for My Niggas was unleashed upon the world on the 1st of February 1993. A much more fragmented recording than his debut, the album, however, fathered a slew of successful singles, including Papa's Song and I Get Around. Other notable tracks include Keep Your Head Up and Something to Die For. The former, a song about the strength of women who are exposed to the unwelcome attentions of disrespectful men, was ironic considering the circumstances in which the record was released. Irony, though, did not hinder the song's rise into the US Billboard Top 10. The latter track can be considered prescient, being, as it is, a warning shot from his mother about finding something worth dying for in the absence of something worth living for. His controversial lifestyle had done little to affect his appeal at the record counter, as the album, like its predecessor, sold comfortably, appealing to new and established fans alike, and ultimately achieving platinum status. The record's success would also win him the respect of the mainstream music industry, and he was nominated in the American Music Awards for Best New Rap Artist of 1993. By the end of the year, despite the success in the charts and at the box office, he was still awaiting trial for the alleged sexual offences. The year had been one of mixed fortunes for Tupac, and 1993 would no doubt be best forgotten in the Shakur household. He surely could not expect 1994 to be any worse, could he?
Like, I'm a totally new human being. Before I was like that, and I was bitter, and that's why I was so evil towards black sisters when I went to jail. Because I felt like I didn't sleep with them bitches to be there for y'all. And y'all put me in jail? Alright, well cool, but now I was wrong to have that kind of thought, right?
To his frustration, 1994 began in the same way 1993 had ended, with trouble continuing to haunt Tupac around every corner. Whilst awaiting trial for the New York sex offences, he experienced further jail time for yet another ugly confrontation. Following hard on the heels of his sacking from the John Singleton movie, incessant personal controversy would lead to him being dropped from a second picture, the black urban thriller Menace to Society. Somewhat aggrieved at his removal, Tupac physically challenged the film's director, Alan Hughes, after storming onto the set of his latest film. The result of this incident was Tupac being sentenced to 15 days in prison for assault. Punishment served, released from the Los Angeles prison, he could be found back in gainful employment, returning to work immediately on a new movie, Above the Rim. As well as starring on screen as neighbourhood gangster Birdie, he also contributed to the mega-selling soundtrack album. The record included the track Pour Out a Little Liquor, recorded by Tupac and his band Thug Life, which went on to sell 2 million copies. It was his earlier music, though, that would return to haunt him yet again, as Courtrooms of America once more took his album Tupacalypse Now to task. It was in September of 1994 that two Milwaukee teenagers murdered a police officer, citing the music of gangster rap, and in particular the Tupac track Soldier's Story from his debut album, as their motivation to commit such a heinous crime. While such public outrage was nothing new to Tupac and certainly not uncommon in the genre of gangster rap, this incident further indicated that the genre was taking on a life of its own. A life from which Tupac Shakur and many of his contemporaries would fail to escape with their lives. As 1994 moved forwards, his trial moved closer. From the start of proceedings and throughout, Tupac would court trouble and in fact came close to losing his life before a verdict was reached. On the 29th of November, Tupac, along with a co-defendant, stood charged of molestation of a 19-year-old woman in Tupac's suite at the Parker Meridian Hotel in New York, as well as other related sexual offences and weapons possession. After the opening day of deliberations, the jury took their leave to consider the charges, whilst Tupac headed for a Times Square recording studio. Aware that the penalty, should he be convicted of the charges against him, were a maximum of 25 years in prison, Tupac naturally wished to make the most of the time he had at his disposal. His recording plans were not realised, however, as Tupac became the victim of an armed robbery as he entered the building. He was shot at least 4 times as the perpetrators disappeared with a diamond ring and gold chains worth in excess of $40,000. He managed to remain conscious in spite of his bullet wounds and was even able to make a call to his mother in Atlanta before being rushed to the nearby Bellevue Hospital, where, as Tupac continued to bleed heavily, the decision was made for him to undergo intensive surgery. A 12-strong team of surgeons worked on his beleaguered right leg, and a damaged blood vessel was repaired. Having been discharged from surgery at 4 p.m, Tupac, against the wishes of astonished doctors, checked out of hospital and was escorted by his mother amidst a throng of gathered reporters. The following day, to the surprise of onlookers, he turned up at court in Manhattan, heavily bandaged, to learn of the jury's decision about his future. After an uncomfortable session in court, punctuated by a visit to a nearby hospital for treatment on his leg, which had become severely numbed by constant sitting in court, he returned to hear the jury's decision. When the verdict was returned, it was one which reflected mixed fortunes for Tupac. He was found guilty of the sexual abuse charge but was acquitted on those of sodomy and weapons possession, each of which carried a stiffer penalty than his actual conviction. In deference to his medical condition, sentencing was delayed and he was granted limited freedom on bail of $25,000. It was accepted, though, that Tupac would probably receive a lengthy custodial sentence, although his lawyer, Michael Warren, confirmed he would seek leave to appeal against the conviction. Tupac was already aware that a prison sentence was likely and had spent time wisely accumulating recorded material for release in his absence, thus keeping his name in the press and his career suitably maintained. In February of 1995, Tupac's great expectation became a reality, as he discovered his new home would be that of the Rikers Island Penitentiary in New York. The glamorous yet dangerous lifestyle he had acquired as a chief mover in gangster rap, a musical genre he had arguably come to represent in recent years, was snatched away from him as he was jailed for a maximum of 4.5 years.
The day I got out of jail, the day I stepped out, that's power. I want these little niggas to see that. I didn't get that power from guns because there's no guns in jail. I got that power from books and from thinking and by strategizing. That's what I want little niggas to see.
For many artists, such a lengthy prison sentence would inevitably mean substantial time out of the public eye. Careers could make or break when denied the vital lifeblood of celebrity required to perpetuate their commercial value. This, however, was not so in the case of Tupac Shakur, whose presence in the charts would remain. whose popularity would be consolidated and, at least in terms of record sales, actually increase. Less than 2 months after being led away to jail, his third album was released to a salivating hip-hop public. The defiantly titled Me Against the World hit the record stores on the 1st of April 1995, and its 15 tracks were fit to burst with tales of black American ghetto life, as well as his own experiences within the confines of the gangster rap scene. Uniquely, the record opened with a piece of commentary in which his Times Square shooting was discussed before resuming its combination of rap and modern R&B. The album's centrepiece was the single Dear Mama, an autobiographical work in which Tupac appears to repent the stress he has caused his mother as a consequence of his turbulent life. The single itself was a hit and propelled its parent album to double platinum status before the end of the year. With mainstream success seemingly almost within his reach, it was unfortunate that he had to experience his greatest commercial achievements from within a New York prison cell. While serving his time, however, he granted Vibe magazine an interview in which he poured scorn on the East Coast-West Coast division and his part in its proliferation, as well as crucially renouncing his pre-prison thug life persona, claiming to be tired of promoting such a negative lifestyle. He complemented this by stating his plan to devote his life and career to works of a positive nature. His pugnacity, though, occasionally poked its head above the parapet of divinity as he went on to implicate several of the East Coast rapping fraternity in his near-fatal shooting. Such candour did little to cool down the simmering temperature that continued to rise inexorably between the two factions. Tupac's newly discovered devotion to peace and harmony, however, was underlined by his marriage to girlfriend Keisha Morris in April 1995, less than a year after the pair had first met. Tupac proposed to Keisha, a science graduate, just 3 months after their first date. But it was to be April 1995, 2 months after being locked up, that they would marry in a quiet prison ceremony. Tupac had been vocal in his wish to start a family, even going so far as to suggest exotic names for potential offspring. He claimed he wanted to raise the family in Arizona and name his children Star or Michelangelo. That was in the future, though, as the present still contained much to be dealt with, including the publication of the Vibe interview, which, once on the newsstands of America, saw those implicated by Tupac go public through various media sources to vehemently deny any involvement with the attempt on Tupac's life. Throughout 1995, Me Against the World ensured Tupac's name was not buried beneath the cream of new and upcoming rap artists. In fact, it succeeded in whetting the appetites of those eager to hear new music from the apparently reborn Tupac Shakur. Additionally, potential movie work was making itself available, as his increased profile resulted in the interest of movie directors upon his release from prison. And that, it would transpire, would be sooner than expected. In October of 1995, less than a year after being convicted, he was freed, having had the good fortune to have found someone prepared to step forward to provide the bail requirement of $1.4 million. The money, once delivered, secured his immediate release. The individual who bailed him out was, of course, someone who recognised the still untapped potential in Tupac Shakur. Someone who was willing to gamble an inordinate amount of money on him being able to make good on his prison promises and deliver on the outside. The person in question was Marion Suge Knight, founder member and chief executive officer of the hugely influential hip-hop and R&B label Death Row. Having overseen his label already generate in excess of $100 million, Knight took the opportunity to release a globally successful artist back onto the streets and into the charts of America. Tupac, in turn, would offer his thanks to his surprise benefactor by immediately flying to Los Angeles to sign a lucrative recording contract with Death Row and begin work on his first album for the label. Without doubt, Tupac's reputation and achievements in the industry preceded him, and alongside Snoop Doggy Dogg and Dr. Dre, he was soon an integral part of the triumvirate that became the very centrepiece of Death Row Records. The new album promised to be more thoughtful and emotionally complex than his previous offerings, and after almost a year of reflection behind bars, Tupac Shakur had plenty to say and time to make up. If Tupac still wished to get to the top of his profession, then the ladder was now available to him thanks to Suge Knight. Musically at least, he was about to enter the history books and make big noises. And this time the noises were of the more conventional kind.
I was the truest nigga involved with Biggie's success. I was the biggest help, but he know how much he borrowed from me. He know how I used to stop my shows, let him blow up, and do his whole show in the middle of my show. How I used to buy him shit and give him shit and never ask for it back. How I used to share. How I used to share my experiences in the game and my lessons and my rules and my knowledge on the game with him. You know what I mean? He owed me more. This was about to blow my fucking head off.
The new album, when finally released, saw Tupac set out his stall with verve and vision. His opening product for the Death Row label was mammoth in every sense of the word. A sprawling double CD, the first in the history of rap music, containing 27 tracks, hit the streets on the 13th of February 1996. Under the title of All Eyes on Me, it was a recording in which Tupac spent every track righting the many wrongs he felt he'd suffered at the hands of his admittedly numerous enemies. The fact the record was released over 2 discs was testimony to the sense of wrongdoing to which he felt he'd been subjected, as well as being a welcome release of the pent-up emotions he had garnered throughout his time in prison. The record was a hit almost before its release, such was the hype and sense of anticipation that surrounded the album. The early predictions proved correct as the album went on to sell in excess of 5 million copies in its first few weeks on sale, as well as making the crucial breakthrough into the R&B charts and the mainstream. This latest recording, though, had many other connotations for Tupac, laying bare, as it did, a brand new career agenda for himself, making good on his earlier promise to expend more energy on his career than promoting the lifestyle he had since renounced. His future in music reaffirmed thanks to another huge-selling album. It was time to switch back into films, and he was about to make his highest-profile moves yet upon the cinema industry. In 1996, he appeared in Bullet with friend and Hollywood veteran Mickey Rourke. The movie, a gangland action thriller, eerily mirrored Tupac's own life, featuring both he and Rourke as gang members in the centre of an ugly urban conflict, struggling to come to terms with their violent rivalry despite a grudging respect for one another. In that same year, he began filming another movie that would confirm his growing reliability as an actor. In Gridlocked, he'd shared lead billing with rising British actor Tim Roth. In the film, directed by Vondi Curtis Hall, the pair played mismatched drug addicts from Detroit, attempting to kick the habit in a variety of government-sponsored detox programs. Tupac, already used to plaudits for his acting skills, received a huge round of applause across the movie press for his performance as jazz performer Spoon, holding his own alongside the more experienced Roth. Despite industry gossip whispering that Tupac was about to make that all-important arrival into the mainstream movie arena, there proved, however, to be a tragic twist in the tale. For fate conspired to ensure Tupac would not live to see the movie's success, primarily because the rap wars had risen to new murderous heights in which Tupac himself would be inexorably embroiled. His earlier implication with Sean Puffy Combs, boss of death row rival Bad Boy Records, and Biggie Smalls came home to roost as the endless baiting shuttled between the East and West Coast fraternities. Despite committing himself to works of positivity, Tupac was to be drawn back into the murky world of gangster rap following the November 1995 murder of former Tupac cohort Randy Stretch Walker in the Queens district of New York. With All Eyes on Me still at number 1 in the Billboard charts, as well as being a modest hit across the world, Tupac's profile was at its zenith. This increased profile, coupled with Walker's murder, ensured there would be little chance of the animosity in the rap wars abating. Indeed, there were to be nasty exchanges between Death Row and Bad Boy employees, which included the unwelcome introduction of a pistol after the Soul Train Music Awards in Los Angeles. Tupac himself wasted little time in stoking the fires with a series of incidents specifically designed to taunt the East Coast Brotherhood. In the promotional video for his next single, 2 of America's Most Wanted, Tupac joined forces with Snoop Doggy Dogg to enact a scene in which they carry out revenge attacks upon caricatures of Biggie Smalls and Puffy Combs, who Tupac believed had colluded in his shooting in 1994. He followed this up little more than a month later when Death Row released the track Hit 'Em Up, an accompanying tune to the single How Do You Want It. It is a brutal track widely regarded as a diatribe against his myriad East Coast enemies, and the attention it received could not have been less scathing had it been an A-side. With the ugly war now approaching boiling point, it was becoming increasingly inevitable that something or someone had to give. When it finally did explode, the end result, whilst hardly being unexpected, would still send shockwaves throughout the music industry across the entire world. The rap wars were about to create another martyr, and the hip-hop industry would, as a result, lose one of its greatest and most successful exponents.
Because I'm a little skinny nigga battling niggas 3 times my size. But Biggie is not a player. He's never been. He's never had bitches until he got some fucking money. That's a trick. That's not a player. It's not a popper. So my point was to prove him wrong. I took everything that he glamorized and I personified it.
Boxing matches featuring Mike Tyson were never expected to go the distance, and his latest bout versus Bruce Sheldon was to be no exception. Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight, accompanied by an entire team of bodyguards, attended the event on the 7th of September 1996 at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. The fight got underway at 8 p.m, and Tyson was announced the winner after less than 2 minutes of the first round. Half an hour later, those who had filled the Grand to witness Tyson's latest achievement left the arena and spilled out onto the streets of Vegas. With the occasion coming to a close in such a short space of time, Tupac and Knight saw their evening open up before them, and there was time to kill. Tupac soon discovered, however, that time was not alone. Within moments of leaving the building, both men became involved in a scuffle with a single individual near the hotel's Grand Garden. Although the police were involved to break up the fight, their investigations into the incident would determine that the third party had no connection with the tragic events that would unfold later on in the evening. Shortly before midnight, the pair had a further run-in with police when Knight was apprehended in his rented car for playing music at too high a volume and for failing to display the appropriate licence plates for his vehicle. The incident was regarded as a minor misdemeanour, though, and was not taken any further, with Knight escaping arrest and allowed to drive on through the streets of Vegas. Less than 15 minutes later, tragedy would make its fated appearance. Travelling east through the city, Tupac was standing upright in the vehicle, his entire upper body dangerously exposed through the sunroof. A sudden burst of gunfire rang out, and Tupac was felled, having taken 4 bullets to the chest. Knight was also injured as shrapnel grazed his head, but he remained sufficiently alert to maintain control of his car and was able to spin around and turn back west. Police trailed the car, however, and eventually apprehended Knight in traffic. Upon registering Tupac's severe injuries, the police immediately called for medical assistance, and the pair were transported to the nearby University Medical Centre. Such were the extent of his injuries that within minutes of entering the hospital, Tupac underwent the first of 3 operations to remove and repair extensive tissue damage to his body, one such operation in fact leading to the removal of his right lung. Knight was released the following morning after treatment for minor injuries, whilst Tupac, in stark contrast to his previous shooting when he discharged himself within hours, continued to fight for his life. A heavy police patrol appeared at the entrance to the hospital, naturally anxious to head off any further incident or potential retaliation. The following day, as Shakur underwent his second bout of surgery, a scuffle involving the local police and a contingent of Shakur's friends led to ugly scenes, but ultimately no arrests. Knight at this time gave a voluntary statement to the police about the incident in the presence of his attorneys, indeed spending an hour in their company as the investigation into the shooting gathered pace. However, there was to be a dramatic change in the direction of the investigation just 2 days later, as tragic news from the University Medical Centre was announced to the public. Despite 3 operations, efforts to save the life of one of rap music's most gifted stars were doomed to failure, his gun-inflicted injuries sadly beyond the help of surgeons. After 6 days in critical condition on Friday the 13th of September 1996 at approximately 4:03 p.m, Tupac Shakur was pronounced dead. He was 25 years of age. It was perhaps unsurprising that the pointing of fingers and indeed the protests of innocence, being as there were many potential suspects, began almost immediately. Many accusing eyes fell upon Suge Knight, but he emphatically denied involvement in any conspiracy, citing his brotherly relationship with Tupac in defence, and also made public his refusal to accept that Tupac's death was a product of the gang wars. Puffy Combs and Biggie Smalls each publicly denied any knowledge of the crime. However, such recriminations just days after his death were somewhat valueless. The fact remained that a mother had lost her son, and Kidada Jones, partner of Tupac at the time of his death, had lost her fiancé. Tupac Shakur was no longer with us, and his career, still burgeoning both in the cinema and in the recording studio, had been cut tragically short. His fans, distraught and bewildered at his death, would be offered the opportunity to deal with their grief as Tupac Shakur's career in the face of death was about to explode once more. Music and movies were already in the can prior to his death, and whilst he may no longer be able to enjoy the fruits of his labour, it was evident that the career of Tupac Shakur was an entity all of its own and would steadfastly refuse to die with him.
In the beginning that I was going to take these niggas out the game, and sure enough I will. Already people can't look at Biggie and not laugh. I took every piece of his power. Everybody that try to side with him or do a record with him or try to unify with him, I'm going to destroy. I swear to God.
Whilst the ramifications of Tupac's murder and of course the consequences began to sink in, including the death of fellow rapper the Notorious B.I.G. in an eerily similar drive-by shooting, his posthumous career began in earnest. Indeed, the first new product was available to the record-buying public less than 8 weeks after his death. On Guy Fawkes Night in 1995, Death Row released an album of new Tupac compositions under the pseudonym of Machiavelli, a name Tupac had adapted from Italian political philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli. The Don Killuminati, the 7-Day Theory, featured him on the sleeve as a Jesus-like figure, nailed to a cross wearing a crown of thorns, whilst the design mapped out the various gang areas of the United States. The musical content of the record found Tupac at his most profound and revealed tracks of depth and humility. It was as though, at least through his music, he had finally relinquished the superficiality of the gangster rap image. In spite of his death, in fact, because of the morbid curiosity that enveloped it, the album was propelled to the #1 spot. Similarly, sales of his earlier recorded material increased exponentially in the wake of his murder. For example, All Eyes on Me sales tripled in those commercially viable weeks following the death of a major artist, the record leaping from number 69 to number 6 on the Billboard charts in less than a fortnight, selling more than 70,000 copies in that period alone. Predictably, his death produced intensive hyperbole for those unreleased records and videos that Death Row had accumulated, which now maximised their sales over the store counters. Likewise, his unreleased movies were also to be subjected to increased hype. The movie Gridlocked finally opened in cinemas with a substantial side order of the elusive X Factor, the headlining performance of a murdered star whose untimely end meant we were yet to see the best of him. Indeed, reviews of the movie were mostly positive, many confirming that Tupac was yet to realise his full acting potential. His final film, Gang Related, was released later in 1997 and featured him alongside such established Hollywood stars as James Belushi and James Earl Jones. Despite the modicum of success he had achieved in the cinema, it was the medium of music in which Tupac really excelled, and once again he featured on the soundtrack of the movie. Released 9 days after the film, the album contained 4 new Tupac tracks and would see established Tupac fans satiated by the introduction of more new material. Tupac's grieving mother, Afeni, was successful in her attempt to wrestle control from death row of her son's accumulated material and established a record label of her own entitled Amaru, Tupac's middle name, under which she released a series of his previously unavailable recordings. The first disc she gave the world was Are You Still Down? Remember Me, a double CD of mostly original compositions and consisting of tracks originally recorded for Interscope between 1992 and 1994. The album features the thoughtful, presciently titled I Wonder If Heaven Got a Ghetto. The album was a success and gratifying for Afeni on 2 levels. It showcased once more Tupac's early promise, which in turn brought substantial financial returns and helped to alleviate the $5 million debt Mrs. Shakur had inherited as a consequence of her son's death. Yet, even after the release of this anthology, there appeared to be plenty more in the Tupac coffers to plunder, Afeni announcing that there were in fact more than 100 tracks yet to see the light of day, and both Interscope and Death Row themselves jumped on Tupac's posthumous bandwagon. A sprawling double album of his greatest hits was compiled and released before the end of 1998, allowing old fans to wallow in nostalgia and remember Tupac in their own way, whilst giving potential new fans a substantial introduction to his material. Before the turn of the century, Still I Rise, an album of B-sides and offcuts recorded with one of his myriad side project bands, The Outlaws, was released, as was a volume of his own original verse, containing more than 70 poems, which highlighted his thoughts and ruminations on life and existence. His legacy did not, however, end there, as there was still a wealth of remaining material to bequeath to the 21st century. Yet another collection of unreleased music, Until the End of Time, his 7th posthumous album spread once more over 2 discs, hit the record stores next. What this new material brought to light was Tupac's intelligent use of sampling, 2 examples of which would bring him significant European hits. Changes and the title track of Until the End of Time both borrowed well-known melody lines from Bruce Hornsby and Mr. Mister respectively, and recycled them for a hip-hop audience. Some would regard the media image of Tupac Shakur, a heavily tattooed loudmouth thug, as unfortunate, not in the least bit helped by his own endorsement of that lifestyle. But most recognise it as only partially disguising a multi-talented artist with a great gift of sensitive storytelling, evident across his extensive back catalogue and poetry. Tupac had achieved many things during his tragically short life. #1 albums, respect at the box office, and although perhaps occasionally being of a grudging sentiment, he had won the admiration of his peers in the highly competitive hip-hop industry. Despite such extensive achievement in his chosen profession, death at the young age of 25 has left his fans, and not least his family, somewhat shortchanged. The overwhelming image is that of an artist with still more to achieve and just as much to offer. The breadth of his talents and the nature of the modern music industry will combine, however, to ensure that the legacy of Tupac Shakur shall never be allowed to simply fade away. His music will always be with us. That night, in September 1996, a candle might have been snuffed out forever, but for many, the flame still burns.
Thank you for buying Maximum 2-Pack, we hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT36YY, or email on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. Details of our full catalogue are listed on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.